In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at CSS classes and CSS variables and explaining the difference between them and basically showing you how you would use them in combination with each other to speed up your whole design process. So you've probably heard this terminology bandied around quite a lot, but what exactly does it mean? Let's kick things off with CSS classes. So you can think of CSS classes like labels you can stick on parts of your web page, things like buttons, images, text, and so on. These labels tell the browser how those things should look, like what color, size, or font they should use. You can reuse the same class label on many parts of the page to make them all look the same. So for example, you might want a class called highlight that makes the text bold and yellow. You can add this label to any bit of text you want to stand out. So now we talked about what classes are, let's have a practical example of how you'd use one. So I'm in Bricks for this example, but you don't have to use Bricks. This is the tool that I use. Once you understand the principle behind it, doesn't matter what tool you use. So for ease, let's add a button in. So here's our button looking, well, all yellow and buttony. Let's say you want to change the color and the size and apply some rounded edges to it. Maybe change the weight of the text inside there. If you're coming from a tool that doesn't use CSS classes, this is going to be kind of new to you. So let's just take the approach that you haven't used it. The way you would probably go about it is you'd come into the various different parts of the tool you're using, for example, Elementor, and you'd come in and you'd just go into things like your typography. You'd say what size you want to use. You may use a rem value, a pixel value, whatever you're kind of used to. Let's just say we'll do 3 rem, so we have some sense of scalability here. And we'll say we want to make this all uppercase, and we want to change the font weight to something like 700. Cool. We've now made those changes. We're going to come in and we want to go and add some border radius on there. So we'll come into our borders. We'll link our radius together for the corners, and we'll just set this to be 1 rem, and we now have nice rounded corners. And obviously we want to change the color of this in the background. So let's come in, change the background color, and we'll set it to blue. And we'll also come into our typography and set our text to be white. Cool, we now have a blue big button with rounded corners. So now if we create another button, that starts off with our basic styling. So we go back to our yellow button, which is much smaller. So what you're thinking is we could probably go about this and say, well, let's copy the styles on here. We'll copy the styles and we'll click on our second button and we'll right click and we'll say, let's paste our styles. And now we have 2 blue buttons. That's fine. And when you're on the same page, it's easy. But once you have that button on a second page, this is where the problem arises. You then have to open up both pages, copy the style from the first page, and paste it to the second page. Now multiply that by 50 use cases, it becomes a little bit unwieldy. Let's just readdress that. Let's remove these buttons completely and add a new blank button in. So there's our good old yellow button back in place. Now, instead of going in and starting to change the typography, the rounded corners and so on, let's give this a class. And to do that, all we need to do is come up to this top section, and inside there, we're going to give it a name. So we're going to call this one primary button. There we go. We've now applied a class to it, and you'll see absolutely nothing has changed, except we have primary button associated with it. But now this is where the fun comes in. So let's come into our typography. We know we want to set this to be white. We want to make this 3 rem. We want to set this to be all uppercase, and we want to change the weight of this to 700. Now we want to come into our background, change our background color to blue, and finally we're going to come into our border. We're going to come into our border radius, link these together, and put 1 rem for our rounded button in. Sweet. Now we've got a button. Let's go and create another button. Let's add that in. Now instead of having to go through and copy those styles and mess about with that, or just actually put everything in manually, all we need to do is apply that class. So there's our class, a primary button. Boom, we now have a button in place that's exactly the same color. And that is the same no matter what page we create. So anywhere that references that particular class will now have any changes you made reflected. So let me show you. Let's come into our background color and set this to be red. Both our buttons are now red. Cool. Simple as that. So now we have much more flexible setup. We can make a change in one location to that class, and every instance of that button using that class will be affected by those changes. It's so much quicker. But there's still some limitations here. What about if we want to have more control over various different aspects? So we don't want to have to come in and set the sort of size on the radius in one instance of this. We want to have like one source of truth. let me show you how we can now start to use CSS variables. Now, before we dig in and start creating some variables, what exactly are they? Well, CSS variables are more like shortcuts or nicknames for values you want to use. So like our color, font size, spacing, and so on. So instead of typing the same color code every time, you can give it a name, which is the variable. And use that name instead. If you ever want to change the color, you just update it in one place and it changes everywhere it's used. So as an example, you might create a variable for your brand's main color, then wherever that color is needed, buttons, titles, borders, and so on, you use the variable instead of the color code itself. Again, let me show you what I'm talking about. So we've got this color, this red. Let's go and set that up as a variable we can use wherever we want to. Now, to do variables inside Bricks, we have to come up to the Classes and Variables Manager. Open this up, and inside here you can see we've got classes, and there's our primary button, the class we just created. Let's just jump over to the variables, and currently we have no variable available. So variables come in two parts, the variable name and the value you want to assign to that name. So let's come in and start off with, let's come into our variable name. We're going to call this primary color. So now we can give it a value. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the value, the hexadecimal value in this example, for our primary color. For our example, let's just paste in a green color. There's our primary color. Let's click save, and we've now created our very first variable. So how can we use it? Well, let's close this down, making sure we've saved everything. So we're going to come into our background color. We're going to click the color chip itself, and we're going to come down, choose raw, and inside there, we're going to use that variable. So we're going to start typing in primary. There's our primary color. We can click it. Our buttons now become green. Let's go back to our variables. And let's just say we want to create a secondary color. This time we'll use a different hex code. This one's going to be yellow. So there's our secondary color. So again, save this. We've now created additional colors. So we'll close this down, come back into our colors. This time we'll get rid of this. We'll put secondary. There's our secondary color. It picks up the yellow. Now let's just say we want to change the typography. We'll change the color from here. Again, we'll come into our raw. This time we're going to use our primary. This is going to look particularly ugly, but you can see that we now have control over this. And then if we want to make any changes, we simply come into this one location, make the color change inside here. So for example, our primary color, we'll set that to be black and hit save. And you can see that now updates accordingly. Now you're not limited to just working with things like this. You can set up things like type scales. Now you could keep a really, really simple example. That's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to come into our variables. We're going to add a new variable in, and we're going to call this body S for body small, for our typography, for example. And what we're going to do inside here is we're going to say this is going to be 1.8 rem. We'll save it. We'll do body medium. We'll set this to be, we'll do one more. So now what we're doing is we're creating a scale. So a collection of different sizes for our typography, small, medium, and large. Now again, like we've seen before, we'll save this, come back out, and now we can come into, for example, our font size. We'll get rid of what's inside there, and we're simply going to click on this little variables option. There's our variables. We'll say we want this to be body M, change the size, come back in, body S, come back in, body L for large. So you can easily use these and reference them, and if you want to make a change, we can simply come back into our variables and make a change there. So we may want to change the scale of this. You can do that. You may want to use a kind of type scale manager online so you can have a fluid typography setup. Again, you can do exactly that inside your variables. So if you consider variables to be values for individual pieces of a class that has more scalability and more flexibility, that's basically what they are. So classes are groups of values that encompass the whole. So for example, our button, our background color, our typography size, the rounded corners, those types of things. And then we've got variables, which are individual values, which we can also use inside a class, like I've just demonstrated. Hopefully this has made sense on the differences between what classes are and what variables are and the benefits of using both of them. So once you understand this, you can start to create your own classes and variables, and you can have a much more fluid and scalable setup. Now, if you'd like me to go into more detail about working with classes and variables, let me know in the comment section down below. If you want to check out my other videos on working with Bricks Builder and the basics and fundamentals, check out this playlist here. As always, all applicable links are in the description. My name is Paul C. This is WPTuts, and until next time, take care.